Hey everyone, I'm Jeff Ralston, YC's president, and I'm thrilled to be here with my friends Alex and Brandon from Embark Trucks. Now, Embark went through YC 5 years ago in the winter of 2016, and they've been through an incredible journey directly from their undergraduate days at the University of Waterloo. They have a few days there to being founders of Embark. So Alex, Brandon, welcome, and maybe we can just start off with you guys introducing yourselves and your company.
Sure. So I'm Brandon. I'm the CTO and co-founder of Embark, and we're working on commercializing the first self-driving trucks.
And I'm Alex. I'm the CEO. Maybe I'll give a little bit of background on us, since Brandon decided to be somewhat vague.
Yeah, and maybe that's we're commercializing self-driving trucks. My gosh, maybe dig in, give us a little color on that, because that sounds pretty huge.
Sure. Yeah. So Brandon and I met, as you mentioned, we both went to Waterloo. We met studying mechatronics engineering together. We did a little over 2 years of Waterloo before we dropped out and came down to San Francisco, well, to Los Altos at the time, to do YC. And to take the self-driving golf cart that we'd built. That was the first self-driving vehicle in Canada. That was kind of what got us in. We had a video of this golf cart that we submitted to you guys as part of the initial package. And I've shown it to a few people, and they ask, why is the video quality so terrible? Because it's bouncing around and you can't really see anything. And I'm like, well, see, imagine that we were 3 college students, and there wasn't a company, there was just a golf cart and a bunch of software, and then we had to fake a video. Well, that's exactly what happened, and that's why it looks so terrible. But it was good. We came down, we did YC. Embark is now 200 people, a little bit over. We operate trucks across the US Sunbelt, and yeah, that's like the past piece. Maybe I'll let Brandon kind of tell a little bit about what the vision is and the product that we're going to bring out.
Yeah. And so looking forward from here, Embark is 200 engineers, and we're looking to do our very first commercial freight operation without a driver in 2023. Obviously, we still have a ton of work to do to get to that point. Everything from safety engineering, electrical engineering, mechanical engineering, and robotics engineering. But I think in 2023, the way I'm thinking about it is this will be the inflection point for the business. This will be, honest to God, the very first time that we'll have our trucks moving freight in a real commercial application. And it'll just be the first step in a long journey for what the company will become. So 2023 is the very first freight run we'll do. 2024, we start looking to commercialize, and that's expansion across the Sun Belt and eventually up north from where we're from in Canada to tackle interesting scenarios like snow and more of the complex areas.
So I have so many questions to ask about self-driving and the current status of the company and where you're going, to elaborate on some of those things. It's super exciting. I remember taking a drive in your truck a few years ago, when sitting back with it seemed like there were 4 million blinking lights and 27 computers back there, and it was in the back of the cab of the truck. But maybe we can roll back just a little bit. Alex kind of threw in that you guys were studying mechatronics engineering, which I guess is a fancy couple of Canadian words for robotics. Is that right? More or less?
That's right.
It means kind of robotics. So you guys were okay, so you're 19 and 20 years old or something like that. And you're studying robotics, and tell us, what's the founding story of Varden Labs, which is what you were called back then, right? How did that come about? And maybe we can roll forward from there.
I was going to say, maybe before we even dive into some of the story there, I think a lot of this for us was driven out of a passion of just robotics in general. Alex and I had met at the University of Waterloo in our robotics program, and I think we came together through a love of just building technology, robotics, spinning LED displays. Our friendship, I think, was built upon that. And I think the journey that we were about to embark on, pun intended, it was just a natural evolution of how we acted and interacted in the earliest days.
Did you guys know you were going to start I mean, I love the fact. I always tell like kids in school, what do I do? I say build stuff, and I love the fact that you guys resonated around building stuff. It was always, that's why we liked your video. We don't care if it's jumpy. You built a freaking self-driving golf cart, amazing. So, but how did this passion for building stuff evolve into let's start a company, which is an interesting leap?
Well, I'll let you in on a bit of a secret here, Jeff, which is that we didn't really intend to try to start a company at first. um, we we started building stuff. We built you hear some of the early stuff, you'd be like, yeah, there's no commercial application for these products. We had a N64 controller that we were really irritated about because the little joystick was too much backlash. So we replaced the joystick with a Xbox 360 joystick, but still inside the N64 controller. So great. No business for that, but it was nice, and it did help me win a lot of games of Super Smash Bros. So that was good. Brandon and I worked on that together with our friend Mike, and then we built Brandon mentioned like a spinning LED screen. So it's like a single line of LEDs. You put it on a motor, you spin it really fast, and you change the LEDs fast enough, and it's kind of like a 2D screen. So you could show like stuff on this as long as you spun it really fast, which is kind of cool. And then kind of the next thing that happened was this golf cart. And it was a golf cart that drove itself. That was the premise. And we kind of had some idea of how it might be a business, but really I think we were working on the technology because we thought it was incredibly interesting. And so I almost think the first 2 years or so of our relationship and of what would eventually become Varden Labs was really us and our friends in Velocity. Velocity being Waterloo's entrepreneurship residence. Basically, it was like us and our friends building fun engineering stuff and having some vague idea that we wanted it to be useful to people. But we didn't. It wasn't like we were trying to build a business. We were trying to build stuff that we thought was cool, that we thought was interesting, we thought might someday be useful. And then once we get into YC, you really start to hear more of the transition to actually turning it into a business.
Yeah, I even remember joking back then, in the earliest days, that we were sort of fooling the world in that we were telling them that we were going to build a business out of this so we could win pitch competitions and get the pre-seed funding we needed to build our cool projects. Yeah, and it wasn't until we honestly got into YC where we were like, okay, well, we've got to make something real here because Jeff has some expectations.
Right? I do have to say, so you guys were in the entrepreneurial residence anyway. So you guys we're thinking entrepreneurship, startup companies. You made the leap to apply to YC with an idea for a company. So you must have kind of been thinking, yeah, maybe there's potential for something here. And you guys, let's actually go back to that. How is it that you applied to YC? And why don't you recall for everyone what exactly the idea was with which you applied? Because it wasn't really Embark trucks, or it wasn't trucks at all, really, right?
Yeah. So the original YC pitch was we were going to take the self-driving golf cart and we were going to build an bigger electric version of it that could shuttle people around campuses. And so it was going to be this campus shuttle for universities and for military bases and for other sort of closed areas. And you can kind of see this is like the first attempt of us really struggling with the inherent tension that defines Embark, which is that on the one hand, we're doing this really, really, really hard technical problem in building self-driving. And we would like as much as possible to narrow the focus of that problem to something that can be done in a tractable way, right? We're really against boiling the ocean. At the same time, we need to build a business that can actually be useful to somebody. And so you can see this sort of tension. We're like, well, in a private campus, it could be really simple to drive and maybe people would use it. And that was kind of the original thesis. that we sort of applied to YC with. And actually, what we did all through YC was go through. We built a second vehicle. We built it in a ridiculous amount of time. It was like 6 weeks or something that we from like getting the vehicle to maybe it was 8 weeks to it actually running.
The trucks are
Um,
taking a little longer, aren't they?
it's not quite as fast to spin it up, these days. But but the trucks work a heck of a lot better. So, it's
Yeah. Well, they
um
also, I mean, you sort of implied this. I mean, there was your original idea instead of boiling the ocean was let's find a tractable problem where there's sort of limited traffic, where it's really constrained. So there's a constrained solution that will help us do it. I remember even from the very beginning, you guys had the idea in mind. Let's actually build something that people really want and can use early on, as opposed to in forever. And I think that sort of that idea infused Embark and all of its predecessors as you guys went
Yeah.
along.
And then I think even through YC, there was a lot of really important learnings, at least on my side on the technical front. I think YC's mentality of just get it in the hands of users and see what sticks. I think we tried to follow that as best as we could as a hardware company, right? Building hardware, putting it in the hands of university campuses. And I think that kind of the two key takeaways ended up being two of the most important values that ended up refining our business strategy moving forward. The first was, as we went to different university campuses throughout California, we really got slapped in the face with just what these places look like from a technology solutions perspective. So we'd go to Sacramento State, and if you've ever been there, they pride themselves in having like one of every species of tree in the world, roughly. And our localization system was heavily based on GPS at the time. And so there's these massive overhangs over the walkways, and all of a sudden our localization system didn't work. But we'd go out to Fresno State, and they'd have clear skies, but their paths would have hundreds of students on it, and then our planning system wouldn't be able to figure out a path forward. And very quickly, going to 6 or 7 of these places, you realize like the more complex your domain is, the harder it is to solve this problem, which translates to the harder it is to build the technology. And so to the degree that you can, you want to simplify and focus building your technology solutions. And the other thing we learned, we had all of these university campuses essentially do paid pilots. So we'd shuttle students from engineering buildings to the center of campus. And the idea was there to, in our seed round and to make YC happy, show that we're building a real product. And I think to some degree we proved the opposite, which was actually a good thing for us in the long run. But students were perfectly capable at walking themselves to class. There wasn't like a desperate infrastructure problem that the universities had, that we need to increase students in classrooms, and the only way to do it is through efficient, automated, self-driving technology. Like that just wasn't the case, is what we found, surprisingly. But I think when we took the next step forward, we knew that we had to find a problem that was well scoped and a problem that needed to be solved, and had a great business case behind it.
Was more of a higher problem. Like what you really found was, it kind of be nice to have self-driving shuttles in campuses, but it's not. It's not like life or death.
I have to say though, shout out to Mike Reed, who managed to convince a large number of universities to pay us money to shuttle students around their campus over the course of like the same 8 weeks we were building the shuttle. When, as Brandon said, they really didn't have a problem. So it's quite an impressive sales exercise to manage to get all
Yeah,
those pilots set up.
you guys were making real progress when I remember sort of mid batch we started to talk about like construction sites in Australia or something weird where there's going to be self-driving trucks, and I was like, what? Self-driving trucks in Australia? And it seems like, why don't you talk a little bit about your transition from the Varden Labs and and self-driving college shuttles to Embark in self-driving trucks? It's kind of an interesting story in of itself.
So this story actually starts early on with the golf cart, and like it was probably I think it was probably like a week or two after we initially ran the golf cart at Waterloo, and there was a bunch of press coverage. And so this was like the first time that a driverless truck had run in Canada, or sorry, a driverless vehicle had run in Canada. Um, and there was tons of press. People thought it was cool. And I got a cold email from this mine in Australia, and they sent me photos of these road trains, which are basically like one truck with 3 or 4 trailers, um, all filled with rock that they were moving around. And they're like, hey, we saw you guys making this self-driving shuttle work. You think that that technology would work on these vehicles? And I looked at it and I thought that it would. That was one of the first observations, because it was also very limited. It was like closed access. The GPS solution we were using probably would have been good enough with some sort of SLAM augmentation, so it probably would have worked. But we had a thing, we were working on it, so we kind of ignored them. And then as we went through YC, I think I've been talking with them a little bit over the course of the fall, and then as we started to struggle a little bit with, yeah, we're able to get these pilots, but we're not really sure that that need is going to be such a strong and compelling need that people are really going to move mountains for it. We started to talk to a few more of the sort of similar mining truck places, and I think the conversation we had with you, Jeff, was one of them offered us some amount of money to do a vehicle for them. They're like, we're going to give you, I don't know at this point, I could go look it up, but it was, some modest, but as a YC company, hundreds of
Really?
thousands of dollars, something that was
Yeah.
exciting to do one vehicle, right? And we're like, oh, that's what it looks like when someone really wants your product, right? They like contact you from across the world off a press release, and they're like offering you hundreds of thousands of dollars with no demo, no nothing, right? Um, and so our question was, we don't have that right now. How do we think about this in the context of YC? And then how do we think about it in the context of finding a great use case for the technology? And I think the decision we made makes a ton of sense. The two decisions were, one, from a YC perspective, people want to see that we're able to accomplish things. And so we aren't just going to like give up on this thing we've been working on for the first 2/3 of the batch and go do something different. Because if you did that, you'd come out at the end with nothing to show for it. So let's finish executing and prove that the tech works, that the team is good, that our sales motion is good. But afterwards, let's take a real good, long, hard look at the business case and make sure that if we're going to spend the next decade of our lives working on something, that it's something that people really desperately want, that meets the standard of that guy who reached out from across the world and offered us hundreds of thousands of dollars to build him a truck. And so we did exactly that, right? That's sort of how we played it out. And ultimately, we didn't decide to do mining trucks because I think that was still too small of a business. But I think that really was the first thing that sort of catalyzed us to start thinking, how can we find somebody who this is going to make a real difference for?
Okay. I really want to hear about Demo Day, but just before we do that, I'm just interested. Do you guys remember your YC interview?
It was a blur. I just remember it being really quick, just like chop, chop, chop. There wasn't much like feedback. It was very just question, answer, question, answer. We left the room and we were like, I don't know how that went. And then we were told that we had to go talk to Sam or another group.
That's right. I remember that.
Of which
Yeah,
Sam was a part of. And we didn't know either if that was a good thing or not. Turns out, in retrospect, I think it made sense because Sam had been really excited about self-driving vehicles. But then again, it was just another one of those. And so I think we were unsure. At least that's what my position was leaving it. It was very unclear.
Do you remember being stressed by the interview, or was it kind of more of a lark for you guys? Because what's interesting, again, I think if I have this right, I might have the years a little off, but Alex, you were 19 at the time, and Brandon, you were 20. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right.
Something like that.
Around that time, yeah.
Yeah. So you're undergraduates. You're coming in. You're talking to YC about wanting to join YC, and you might figure that a lot of venture capitalists would be a little bit skeptical about a couple of Canadian kids coming in and saying they're going to build self-driving anything.
I think we had the baseline understanding that Silicon Valley, culturally accepted the young founder story. And so I think we had felt comfort from that angle. But to give you a sense, I think we had done so much prep for the YC interview process. We looked up all the prep questions on TechCrunch. We ran through who was going to answer what and when and how, and spent hours on that. So we came into the interview, and I don't think you guys asked us anything that we hadn't been asked before via the prep material. So to say we were stressed and nervous, probably, but I don't know if at least in my mind, the young founder story really played into that.
And so, so you go through the batch, you make progress on your shuttle, might get you some sales. You're the third founder at the time, and you come into demo day, and I think, Alex, you said you chose to focus not on these opportunities that were sitting out there in the ether in Australia, wherever, but on the focus that you'd made and the progress you'd made on self-driving shuttles. How did demo day go? What was your experience there?
Yeah. So demo day went. I would say it went really well, and it was certainly helped along by the fact that Cruise got acquired maybe 14 days before demo day.
Mm-hmm.
So I remember waking up, and this is the beginning of something that would happen to me lots of times throughout the history of Embark. I feel like every 6 months I'll wake up and I'll look at like the news, and I'm like, oh my God, I didn't expect that, right? And this was the first one, was when Cruise got acquired. And we're like, Cruise got acquired for $1 billion. Wow. And so that really blew me away, and we didn't expect it, but it really helped us because one day before, self-driving was, there's no clear way to make money. Like how could these companies be valuable? Now Cruise was, I think at the time, the biggest acquisition in the history of YC. And conveniently, a lot of the people at Demo Day had invested in Cruise. And so there were a lot of people who saw Embark and were, I think, much more excited to invest in Embark because now they had the taste of how this could actually work. And I think we actually share investors with Cruise for that reason.
And I'll just say, for the sake of listeners, Cruise was as Alex said, a YC company that was also building self-driving vehicles, but self-driving cars, which was purchased by General Motors in 2016.
And if you recall, Jeff, and I don't know if this was on purpose, but we were second to present, and to open demo day, you guys had played Cruise's demo day pitch from 2 years prior. So it was Cruise, they got acquired, another company, and then Embark. And so I think you really teed it up for us there.
I actually don't remember if we were thinking, oh, this is going to get those Embark guys. It was sort of like, oh, wow, this just happened. We might as well. This is like a cool thing to do. But certainly that was a happy timing for you guys.
And yeah, we found, so I would say coming out of demo day, the seed round was pretty straightforward to raise. It was, I don't know, probably a couple of weeks. And we'd already closed the seed round. And it was at a price we were like super excited about back then. Today it would be considered horribly low because that's how the venture ecosystem has evolved. But
you want to disclose what you raised at and how much you raised? You don't have to if you don't want to.
We raised like 2 million. And I would say the bulk of it came in at less than a 10 million valuation.
Still pretty good, right? Especially, in the broad scope of things where people used to raise at $2 or $3 million valuations, and valuations have come up as they seem to always do, as there's more cash and more competition. But it seemed like it was a really successful trajectory for you guys to be on. Yeah,
we were certainly excited about it.
Before we move on to life post YC, if you guys reflect, and Brandon did a little bit of this, reflecting on what happened during YC, what do you guys think were the one or two or three things that were most transformative for Barden Labs into Embark and for the company as you went through the batch program?
For me personally, I think it would be, maybe I'll pick three, right? So I think one of them was really forcing us out into the market and forcing us to actually have the experience of trying to sell this product to somebody and see what do they think and would they pay for it. And I think, as a hard tech company, we were very different than our batchmates. But we still learned a lot, even though we had to go out with a much earlier product, one that, couldn't have been sold at scale, but we still doing that same exercise to learn from users was very, very useful for us. Um, the second one was, I think there was a huge amount of value to us from getting access to a network. People ask, like, what are the big value props for YC? And I think for us, the biggest one was we were coming from Canada. We were two university kids. We didn't know anybody in the Valley, and yet we were able to access this whole network of people, many of whom are still big allies of the company. People that invested in the seed round in Embark are still people that I'll call up and ask questions to. And so getting access to that network and being able to raise money when we had no prior reputation was really powerful. And I think the third thing was, it was really powerful for me to have people believe in us. I think it's sort of implausible when I look back on it, right? That we would be able to build this into a huge company. We were like two kids who didn't know anything. We didn't know enough to know that it was implausible. And so I think the fact that YC, as certainly sitting from Canada, reading Y Combinator news, we would feel that this is like the pinnacle of the Valley. And so just having somebody who we knew had seen companies succeed, who had backed Cruise, who had backed Instacart, who'd backed like great companies before us, that was really validating, and I think gave us some of the confidence to be able to keep pushing forward when self-driving is obviously hard, and it's not a foregone conclusion when you're a team of four that this was a reasonable challenge to be tackling.
Yeah, like one of the things I believe strongly about YC, and about one of the most important things that we can do for a company, is to help a company actually believe, really deeply, truly believe that the implausible, and it's always somewhat implausible. Maybe it was more for you guys and more implausible than your run-of-the-mill implausibility that you'd build a gigantic company out of your two-person startup. But it's always implausible, and getting that extra, just core, strong belief that you guys might just be the ones that do it, that build the next whatever, the next Instacart, Coinbase, Airbnb, now of course Embark, is actually a key exit value for YC as you go off into the crazy world of actually getting to the next step and building your product and delivering it to customers. So you guys, you're dangerous in that you have a couple $1 million in the bank, and you have the Australians probably calling you up from time to time saying, "Where's our truck?" and you have some college campuses on the hook now. What happened to create the version of Embark what was the genesis of the version of Embark that we see today after you finished YC?
So yeah, exiting YC, kind of to set the stage again, I think we had a little bit of a sour taste in our mouth after the entire campus program. We knew that we had built something really awesome, but we knew that nobody wanted it, and that was maybe the first and only time we had felt that in the company's history. But it I can tell you very honestly, it didn't feel great, right? Having spent weeks on end not sleeping building this shuttle program, and knowing that no matter how much more I put into it, it wouldn't go any further. And so we looked across all of the different domains that we could conceive of in the self-driving landscape, from taxis through shuttles and an iterated version of that, to the small speed, low speed delivery robots to deliver food, all the way through Australia. And kind of indexing on those two key values, like simple problem, great business, and almost looking at that lens at every single application. And trucking just really stood out for that reason. When you look at how we're scoping the trucking problem, we want to do this hub-to-hub model, this hub-and-spoke model, where humans will do the first and last mile of the journey, and then our automated trucks will go from one hub to another hub. And that allows us to avoid city street driving and focus on solving the simple long range problem of the middle mile. And that kind of checked off the box of, it's not easy, but it's simpler. And that's really important. And then on the business side, you look at the trucking industry, and it's under immense pressure. And that's one thing that I was personally surprised by. There's 60,000, 80,000 truck drivers short. You get a new report out every single week. You look at, the port of LA right now, and there's freight ships lined up to get into port. There's huge problems in logistics that exist today. And then you look at the scale of the industry, $700, $800 billion. And it's just this massive opportunity that's ripe for innovation. And we're well positioned to take that on. And so for us, it was almost the obvious choice in some way. It was a nervous choice, but an obvious one, that this was the way we had to go forward. And I think over the last 6 years, we've had the benefit of being one of very few companies that have been able to pick such a clear vision and a clear perspective on how this industry should take shape, and really put our heads down into it for such a long time. And I think that, in all honesty, is one of the reasons why we're one of the greatest companies working on self-driving trucks today, because from very, very early on, we were able to find that perspective.
Yeah, for what it's worth, I found it immensely impressive how you guys kept focus on the core thing that you were building. And even if the core changed from shuttles, which I thought you were incredibly thoughtful about, I mean, I'm sure it was a little depressing there, but you were really thoughtful about whether and how you were going to deliver value with this core idea. And then the next step you took, and then we're incredibly focused on, this is the right solution for the technology we've built. So I think the result of that is, led directly to the success Embark has had.
One of the things I'd say we were almost a little bit surprised about, happily surprised about, was, we finished our seed round, and less than a month later, we tell all of investors, hey, we've got this new mission, here we go. And I don't know if it's a product of the ecosystem overall, but nobody was really upset about that. They're like, all right, let's go. What's the plan? Was sort of the sentiment. And for us, the plan forward was, okay, well, let's buy a truck. Let's figure out if we can control it with a computer. Let's by early next year, control the truck system, get it on a track, make it work like our golf cart did, and take the first step forward. And that was a really exciting opportunity to iterate on the platform, get our hands deep in really what the automotive industry presented challenges to. Automotive tier ones didn't really want to work with a couple of college dropouts that claimed to have self-driving tech. We didn't think or see the world the way that they did at the time. So we had to do all of these crazy things, like reverse engineer how the braking system worked, and work our way around the cryptographic hashes in some of the systems there, just to get the system online. And those were the crazy and fun things we did out of necessity in the earliest days. And I think a little bit of our ingenuity got us through that.
I feel like we can talk for a really long time here, but I want to transition for a little bit just to sort of the next phase of the companies. You went from, few people to, a few dozen people to a couple hundred. There's a whole challenging task of company building there. You have to hire, you have to fundraise more, you have to think about building a culture and a management team and all that stuff. I just think that for kids right out of school, that probably was some of the most daunting stuff. And maybe Alex, you're better positioned to comment on this. Well, I'm sure both of you have a lot of, had to go through a lot of pain and learning as the company has grown. Tell us a little about how that's happened, how the story, and maybe it must have been just hard just hiring, people who are experienced when, you have to have, people with gray hair like me reporting to a kid. I mean, literally is what has to happen. They have to have the confidence in you guys to want to join up with a company like Embark. So talk a little bit about that.
I'm honestly still a little shocked that some of Embark's early employees decided to come work for us. But because we hired a world-class team. I think one of the things that's maybe a little different again about Embark versus some of the other sort of software only startups, is when we came out, we're like, all right, there's absolutely no way we can just hire a bunch of other Waterloo software engineers and get this done. We're gonna need to hire real experts. We're gonna need to hire robotics experts. We hired our first software engineering hire was a ran like one of the research programs at Volkswagen and built the first planner to run on an OEM uh, self-driving car on public roads. And yeah, he decided to come work at what was then Varden Labs. And our first, we had to pretty quickly after that, we had to hire a head of recruiting. We hired like
Well,
Shopify's head of
Alex, let
technical
me interrupt
recruiting.
for a sec. Let me interrupt. Do you know why? Like, why did that person make that decision? Do you ever ask them what, like,
I've,
what
I've
were
never,
they thinking?
I honestly, I've never like asked really seriously. Like, I know that like they were really excited about the guy. His name is Samudra. Samudra was really excited about startups. Um, he wanted to someday get into startups. He thought that the 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 pragmatism we brought to the problem was refreshing. He'd been working on self-driving for a long time, and so he had sort of that context. And I think part of what convinced him is we had dinner with him and we just laughed about how self-driving was, and we felt we had a lot of the same values. And he sat in the golf cart. So ironically, the golf cart was a big part of how we did recruiting, even after we weren't working on a golf cart anymore, because
The
it was
golf cart
like,
that got
come
you
see
into
what we
YC.
built, right?
And
That's
maybe
awesome.
That's right.
to generalize that last point a little bit, because I think you're getting at a theme here, Jeff, which is like, how as young founders with no credibility did we accomplish anything? And it was honestly always through building something and then putting it in the hands of people so that they could not deny the fact that we had built that thing. And it was almost in a lot of ways the contrast that looked really exciting, which was, there's a team of 3 people here and they have a self-driving golf cart. Like, how the hell did that happen? I've been on Volkswagen's team for a year and we've got 30 people and we've accomplished less. And I think that story really resonated with people because they knew you could do great things with small teams. And so when looking at hires, investors, anything, even to this day, our primary mode of exciting people about the business is put them in the vehicle and show them that it can do great things.
I think the point is less how do young founders do that? How does any founder do this? Any founder does this by recruiting people to come to their crazy, implausible idea, by telling an incredible story about the future. And you guys, the toys you guys built, the awesome, cool product that you built made your story more plausible. It made you guys credible. It made the whole venture credible, in my view. It made it credible to YC, and in the end, it made it credible to the people that you brought on board. So, and Alex, you were saying when I interrupted.
Oh, I was just saying, Samudro, our first software engineer, is not the only really high quality person that joined the leadership team. We hired a head of policy who previously worked at the White House and then had worked in the automated vehicle industry. We hired the technical recruiter who is Shopify's head of technical recruiting. There's a funny story there, but we don't have time for it. But we hired like
Next video.
really excellent people. That's right. Next video can just be like funny stories from Embark. And I think, yeah, one part of it was the story, and one part of it was the vehicle, and one part of it was getting to know us and feeling like we were people that got along. That we had similar values, and I think that's the 3 things that brought the people together. And I'm incredibly proud that all those people still work in Embark today. And so we have a really great group of people, both people who are been here with many years and people who joined the last few years. But that's certainly the most enjoyable thing day to day is like the group of people that believe in this mission with us now.
In every startup, in nearly every startup, there comes like pretty low moments that you have to fight your way through. If you guys had to pick out like the lowest of the low moment and talk about how you fought through that, does anything immediately come to mind?
I mean, I think the obvious spot where we really had to change and handle a lot of adversity, which I don't know that we ever felt terrible about it in the moment, but was like, a pretty scary spot for the business was when we had to pick a new business. All right, self-driving shuttles isn't going to work. What do we do now? And it was a very structured process. It didn't just happen. We sort of had, we very specifically said, okay, we're going to finish doing what we set out to do because we want to prove that we can. Then we're going to take a step back and we're going to think really hard. We spend, a few months getting to know all the opportunities that exist, and then we're going to make a decision. And I think I always say startups are kind of like three things that keep them going. Um, it's a really exciting vision. It's having resources in the bank, and it's having people you enjoy working with. And I think if you have two of the three, you can survive not having the third. And so at the time we had the resource and we had the people, and we didn't know what the vision was going to be. But we were a small enough team. We liked working together. We liked what we were working on, and we knew that we thought it could be valuable. And so that sort of rotation wasn't scary, but it was certainly disorienting.
Yeah. I'm kind of intrigued, just along these lines of building the company. If you guys have a way of describing what it's like to work at Embark, what's the culture like? What is it? I mean, I just sort of imagine there's a couple of hundred tinkerers there, all like, dying to get on the trucks and build them and, and improve them. What is it? What does it feel like to you? Do you guys have a way of articulating how you think about the company you're building?
I think we've got a lot more problems to solve than we have people. Is the first thing I'd say, and I think as a result, we naturally index on people that take a high degree of ownership and pride in the work that they do. And so I think the coolest thing, at least personally for me, about working at Embark is I honestly just feel like a sponge, because there's so many different facets of this business. We have experts in control systems and AI and robotics and how to think about the marketplace and finance, etc. And we're still small enough today where you can go talk to that person who's the honest to God expert in their field. And through one way or another over the last 5 years, I think we've built one of the most high performing teams, and that's just really exciting. And so I think to be in this environment, in a lot of ways it's motivating, in a lot of ways it's stressful and challenging, just because we have so much to do and we're always resource constrained. But I think at the end of the day, it's the people. I think between Alex and I think one of the things I'm most proud of is just the culture of humility that we have. And that's at the personal level, but also humility and respect for the challenge that we have ahead of us. And that's really awesome too. We're not too headstrong on as individuals within the organization.
I've always been super impressed with the way you guys have always been really clear-headed about how hard the problem you were solving was and that you were going to solve it, which was always super impressive. So there's some exciting stuff coming up for Embark in the near future. Can you guys talk a little bit about sort of, you jumped ahead a little bit, Brandon, to 23, 24, but in 21 or 22, 23, and 24, and 21, something pretty exciting is going on. Maybe discuss that, and we can wrap up in just a few minutes and let you guys get back to building the self-driving trucks of the future.
Yeah. So 21 has been a crazy year. 2020 and 2021 were both crazy years, I would say, right? There was the pandemic. We had to figure out how to be remote. There was a period where it wasn't clear if the bottom was going to drop out of the venture market. And then all of a sudden, everything came roaring back. Suddenly people were asking, the opposite question, how can you go faster? How can we really bring this to market in the most accelerated way? And we spent some time really looking at, what's the next step? Because at the same time, through that piece of the pandemic, we had solved a lot of really important problems and positioned the technology to a spot where we felt like we knew what the roadmap needed to look like. And so we had a level of clarity after 5 years of we've solved a lot of the hard problems. We have construction working. We have the ability to operate in adverse weather conditions up and operating. We have something called Vision Map Fusion, which allows us to operate where the map is changed. And so we had a lot of these fundamentals, and now we had to think about how do we get that onto the road into production. And so in June, we announced a SPAC transaction where we're merging with a company called Northern Genesis Acquisition Corp. 2. They have amazing Canadian founders of the SPAC actually, who we're really excited about, and hopefully by the time this is posted, we will have gone through the final couple of weeks of the process. So we're sitting here today, a couple of weeks out from the end, and we'll post this. I think the intention is once Embark is trading under its own ticker, and so the last step here is basically to go through, close that merger, which will result in up to $600 million ending up on Embark's balance sheet, and Embark becoming a public company.
Wow. Well, that's pretty amazing. I well, I'll just say I'm super excited for you guys. It feels to me like this is sort of a story of college kids who like to play with building things and just kept on building bigger and bigger and cooler things until you got to like building trucks, which are, it's hard to get too much bigger than that. I guess maybe I'd love to leave you guys with the last word here. You're building, just some of the hardest of the hard tech that you can build, self-driving, 18-wheelers. That's pretty awesome. Do you have any words of wisdom that you want to leave for future hard tech, any kind of founders, and especially, I guess, like, people who are your profile, who are whether they're your age or older, who are builders, who are excited about new technology?
I'll go first. I think my sort of one liner for Embark, kind of how we run the company and always have, is we would look at a problem, and the first question is, well, why won't this work, right? And we think about that for a bit, and we try to understand why it wouldn't work. And in some cases, we just didn't know enough, and then we're like, okay, we're just going to ignore that problem. Probably won't work. But there are some problems where we think about it, and we think about it, and we think about it, and we get through all the questions of why it wouldn't work, and at the end, we'd be like, well, I can't see why it wouldn't work. And then we just go out and do it. And I think that I can't see why it wouldn't work has been sort of the guiding light for us in many directions. And I think you can get to that point in a business, I don't know why it wouldn't work. Then maybe the answer is just because no one's done it yet.
And I think for me, it's really hard to look at where we are now and answer the question, how did we get here given where we started? But I think the reality of startups and exponential growth in general is that every step of the way is just one step forward. And this whole journey has been just a series of incremental steps. And some of them have been in the right direction. Some of them have been completely in the wrong direction. But most of them are generally aligned with where we need to go. And when looking forward, it's always this kind of not so steep slope to take one more step forward. But when you look backwards, you've already climbed a mountain. And that's sort of what this journey has been in a lot of ways. And so I don't think there's a simple piece of advice that I can give that says, how do you take one big step from where you are to where we are today? But very much, a series of small steps ends up accumulating into something great and large if you spend enough time on it.
Well, thank you guys for taking the time out of preparing for your IPO and building your trucks and building your company to do this video with us. It's been an incredible pleasure and honor for me to get a chance to work with you guys over the last 5 years, and I'm looking forward to many more years of that. And good luck with everything coming up. Great to see you guys.
Thanks, Jeff.
Thank you, Jeff.
Bye.